Hey everybody, how's it going? Max with BuzzTox here, and I'm back with a Westworld Season 2, Episode 6 prediction video. In these videos, I look at all the information released for the upcoming episode, and I give my thoughts and feelings about what will happen, and what to expect. Now firstly, this episode is called Phase Space. And this could be interpreted in multiple ways. Phase space could represent a constantly changing space, constantly changing time. Or there's the serious definition that says it's a multidimensional space in which each axis corresponds to one of the coordinates required to specify the state of the physical system. That is a mouthful. But I think, long story short, this really represents the cradle. And we even see the cradle hinted at in the synopsis of the episode, where it says, "We each deserve to choose our own fate." And the cradle instinctively goes against the hosts being able to choose their own fate, considering what it is. And you can look on the Delos website, and the cradle is a simulation technology that stores and tests all of Delos' storylines. So the cradle stores data that maintains every storyline that ever existed. If you take Maeve, for example, it would take her daughter's storyline. It would take Maeve's new storyline, working at the Mariposa. And this is great and efficient for the Delos team, because firstly, you have a data bank of all the stories, so you can easily upload it to any host you want. And secondly, you can run simulations of the storylines to see how they go. If you're developing a new storyline, you could essentially run it through the cradle and see how the storyline would actually work, rather than actually implementing it in Westworld itself. So the cradle seems like an essential piece of technology to run Westworld. And currently we know the state of it. In episode 3, we see Bernard in the present timeline, and he enters the Mesa. We learn that floors 42 through 45 are on fire. And Malling even says that someone took out the cradle. And we got that reaffirmed when Costa told Strand that the cradle has been set on fire and completely destroyed. And that leaves huge implications because they can't recover anything from the cradle. All the host backups, they've all been destroyed. So we know that eventually the cradle is going to be destroyed. And it seems like that's going to be this episode. The synopsis, "We all deserve to choose our own fate." That could be a quote from Dolores. When you destroy the cradle, you destroy the ability for it to control you, because it houses all of the storylines. And once that's destroyed, the hosts are free to choose their own fate, without having a bank of their storylines looming over their head. And because it's destroyed, it's going to make it a lot harder for Westworld to just start back up after this incident. But I believe that this episode is pretty much purely going to take place 2 weeks in the past. And that's the build up until we see Bernard on the beach. And the cradle, I believe, is going to play a very important role in this episode. Because we see Elsie and Bernard make it to the Mesa. And we see them walk into the cradle. And it's essentially a virtual reality system that Bernard is going to go into to look into the past. Or rather, look at the storylines that have been created. And we see Bernard see Teddy leaving a location. And I researched everything, and this location is brand new. It's not in Escalante. It's not in Sweetwater. So I believe that Bernard is going to be pursuing a plot point that has yet to be revealed. Unless he's going to be able to look back on his code and his storyline to see what Ford wanted him to do. Or to look back and see where he hid that human control panel that he's trying to find. And that's how I think the story is going to progress. Bernard's going to be utilizing the cradle, but I think it will come to a point when Dolores returns to the Mesa that it will get destroyed. We even see this blonde woman looking upon the cradle. I'm not sure if this is Angela or this is Dolores. Or it could be a new character. But it's clear to say that the cradle is not going to make it out. But the most important thing is what the cradle could be. We looked at Dolores and Arnold's interactions throughout the episodes. And in the first interaction, we see Arnold telling Dolores about a dream he had, where he's on the beach of an ocean and he sees Dolores and the others on the distant shore, and how they left him behind. Initially, it seems very unlikely that Arnold would have had a dream about this, because it's literally a copy for what actually happened. And based on this preview, it proves even more that this isn't a discussion between Arnold and Dolores, or there's a twist to it that we don't completely understand. And the first reason is the flashbacks. Every time Dolores or Bernard has a flashback, nothing has changed. We just see the past. However, when we see Arnold and Dolores, the dimensions of the screen are changed. The aspect ratio is smaller. And we see that even further in the preview, where Dolores and Arnold are again having a discussion. The dimensions of the screen are changed. And even more importantly, when Bernard goes into the cradle and sees Teddy, the dimensions of the screen are yet smaller. This suggests that this interaction between Arnold and Dolores we're seeing actually takes place in the cradle. The different aspect ratio is suggesting to the audience that this is a different reality. And I think that has huge implications on the plot, and it provides context to scenes that we've already seen. In the first scene with Arnold and Dolores, Dolores catches Arnold lost in thought. Instead of him being lost in thought, he was probably just integrated in the simulation. And then Arnold recounts a dream that coincides with Bernard's experience, which means that I think Dolores is secluding Bernard, or using Bernard's storylines to try and understand something that he did, or to understand him as a character. But based on the information, I think it could potentially be a Bernard and Arnold transfer. We've seen in previous episodes that Dolores is almost upset with Bernard, sheerly by the fact that he isn't Arnold. Dolores may try and push Arnold onto Bernard, because he might be a huge asset to their team. The reason why I think that is because of this interaction in the preview. Arnold talks about how humans don't deserve what they built, and what will become of Dolores once she's free from humanity. And then Arnold goes on to say that he thinks he has a choice to make, but Dolores immediately corrects him and snaps out of the conversation to say no, he didn't say that. This to me strongly resembles the William and James Delos conversation. They had an interview for Fidelity. They repeated this interview, and the idea was to keep James Delos on the script that they predicted. And that represents the likeness between the new host and actual James Delos. And it seems like Dolores is doing this with Bernard in the cradle, for example. And I feel like whatever Dolores did could have been pretty effective. Because if we look at Bernard when he wakes up on the beach, he has flashbacks. And these flashbacks, some of them are from Arnold. They're not Bernard's memories. Bernard sees a flashback of Arnold showing Dolores his home. And it doesn't make sense for Bernard to have these memories because Bernard is a whole different being. I feel like they got there because Dolores could be accessing the cradle and utilizing the cradle, looking at her past reveries and maybe showing that to Bernard or downloading it to Bernard. But let me know what you guys are thinking about it. All I know is that what we're seeing is not actually what it is. I know that this cradle is being used, and it seems like it's integrating Bernard to Arnold. And it seems like Dolores is a part of it. But I'm sure after this episode we'll have more answers. But on top of the cradle, I think a lot more is going to happen this episode. And we're going to be introduced to a set piece that's almost been teased this whole show. We see after Charlotte leaves Bernard and captures Abernathy, she makes her way back to the Mesa. We see her standing here with some of the Westworld security. We see a woman in the background who we've seen is actually dead. And she's holding a knife. I think this woman is going to be attacked by a bear and by Dolores' men. And while Charlotte puts the map back online, she has Abernathy, so they're clearly trying to extract the information that they put inside of him. And that's why I think this episode is so important, is because of the plot points in place to bring all of the characters back to the Mesa. Charlotte has Abernathy. Dolores is going to do everything she can to rescue Abernathy. And Bernard needs to go to the Mesa with Elsie to uncover more answers and get help. And it seems like they're going to enter in a similar way. We see Bernard entering the Mesa through the door to the train. And Bernard and Elsie, I'm sure, are going to uncover more information about Delos, the organization, and make their way to the cradle, which is seemingly improvising. So it will be interesting to see how that dynamic works out. But I think after this interaction, Bernard will stumble back into his vision, where he's overseeing Dolores' men take over the control center. And we see Bernard potentially pick up a gun himself and start shooting. Maybe he's protecting the cradle. Or maybe the human control module that he printed. But then that raises the question how Dolores got to the Mesa. We see that the train is actually set up to leave. She had it ready for speed and it's going to be flying straight into the Mesa. And we saw that she reprogrammed Teddy, so it seems like he's okay. But I think the Teddy we'll see will be more of a soldier and be more hardened to the fact that humans need to die to make room for the hosts. And this would align with Dolores' vision. And I believe we're going to see them actually access the Mesa. They're going to break in, and I believe they're going to rescue Abernathy. Charlotte tells Bernard in the present timeline that Abernathy keeps slipping out of her fingers, which means that she didn't actually get the information from Abernathy. I believe just in time, Teddy and Dolores are going to arrive. We see Teddy in a security outfit putting a gun on Ashley. And we know that here he's rescuing Abernathy because we can see his face in his own code in the background. And I believe naturally them rescuing Abernathy, the control center will be attacked, Bernard will be there to witness it all, and then something will happen that will result in Teddy being washed up on that water and being completely wiped. But the natural connection there is Bernard. Here is where Dolores and Bernard are going to come back together, and they might be switching hosts into new bodies. Hence Bernard's revelation when he says he killed them all, when he looks at all the hosts in the water. But I believe a small aspect of this episode is going to focus on Maeve. Last episode we saw her find her own very new inner voice, where she's able to get access to the mesh network. And I believe it will take her some time to get out of Shogun World, but I think she will. And in this scene, I believe this is Maeve finally reaching her daughter, or it's a reverie looking back upon her experience of her daughter. And then I believe in the present, in the actual present timeline, we might get a look at Bernard, and it looks like we're getting care packages. The military are stocking up in order to take on Dolores. They're waiting for the water to drain, and I'm sure at this time they've cleaned out all the hosts. So it's only a matter of time where they're ready to enter the valley and reach Dolores. But by that time, I think she'll be ready. But we'll see what happens. But that's it for me, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to this prediction video. If you have any predictions or ideas on what's going to happen in the next episode, please leave a comment down below. Let me know. But until next time, I'll see you guys later.